Hello, everyone. Welcome to our webinar today. We're going to be talking about the 24-25 FAFSA, helping homeless and foster youth. I know many of you are logging in, so we'll get started in just a few minutes. But again, just welcome. We'll get started in a little bit. And just before the call, a lot of us here, presenters, were just talking about how cold it is and all the snow. So I hope everyone is staying safe and staying warm wherever you may be joining us from. We'll get started in just a few minutes here, but welcome to the webinar. All right, so as folks are going to be coming in, welcome to all those that are joining us. I see people are saying hello in the chat. Good afternoon, good morning, wherever you're joining. We are here today to talk about the 24-25 FAFSA. This webinar is being recorded and it will be uploaded and shared and archived in the next few days, which brings me to some just general housekeeping here today. The webinar is 75 minutes long. We will have plenty of time for questions. And I just want to say, all your questions, please put them in the Q&A. I see the chat is popping, which is fantastic, but we want to make sure that we see your questions. So put your questions in the Q&A and we can keep the chat going with, fun things that y'all are doing to help support the FAFSA, best practices. That could be for the chat, questions in the Q&A side. Again, audio is muted for everyone. The session is being recorded and we will send that out in the next few days, as well as the PowerPoint. And we also will be doing a Q&A compilation of some questions that we'll send out probably in the next few weeks. That will take us a little bit longer to send out to you. But we welcome you all again. My name is Jillian Sitar, and I am the Director of Higher Education Partnerships at Schoolhouse Connection. If you aren't familiar with Schoolhouse Connection, we are a national organization based in DC with a mission to overcome homelessness from prenatal up to post-secondary. A little bit about us can be found on our website, but we do a lot of strategic advocacy, practical assistance, and partnership with many schools, higher education professionals, students, families, service providers, and other organizations. And I'm so happy to have such great partners here today. We have Debbie Raucher from John Burton Advocates for Youth, or JBAY, Jenny Pokipner and Jasmine Miller from Youth Law Center. We have an amazing group of folks here to help answer your questions as it relates to homeless and foster youth. So just really happy to have just an amazing group of people that are going to be working behind the scenes and also on the screens as well to talk a little bit about our homeless and foster youth provisions for our students on the FAFSA. So today we're going to be talking about the 24-25 FAFSA and what that means for our homeless and foster youth. We'll talk through some specific strategies and tools to help, work with financial aid offices for our homeless and foster youth. And then specifically, we'll talk about how ARP-HCY funds can be used to help support FAFSA completion and transition to post-secondary education. And if you aren't sure what ARP-HCY is, we will talk about that as well from the American Rescue Plan for Homeless Children and Youth. So stay tuned for that as well. And again, just our agenda, we're getting some introductions in the chat. It's so great to see so many people from all over the country, which is awesome. And then we'll go right into a brief reminder of what the definitions are for homeless and foster youth. Go talk about the 24-25 FAFSA, the specific changes for our homeless and foster youth, as well as looking at actual screenshots of those questions. And we'll talk through what to do with each of those questions as well. We'll end with some best practices, and of course, we'll sprinkle in some Q&A throughout this time here and have our resources at the end. So just as a reminder, when we're talking about homelessness within the FAFSA, we're using the federal education definition of homelessness, or also known as the McKinney-Vento definition of homelessness. So that is when children and youth are lacking a fixed, regular, and adequate nighttime residence. And there are some examples here on the screen of what that can look like. So sharing the housing of others, or also known as doubled up or couch surfing, living in motels, hotels, emergency or transitional shelters, all sorts of things. But I really want to hone in on that last bullet point, living in a residence hall or a dorm, but otherwise would have no place to go. So we know a lot of colleges, a lot of institutions might have a live-on requirement, but if that student did not have a place to go aside from that residence hall or the dorm, they would be considered homeless. Taking that a step further, we also talk about unaccompanied homeless youth, and that plays a factor in the next slide I'll get to in a little bit. But those are children or youth without a fixed, regular, and adequate nighttime residence, but they're also not in the physical custody of a legal parent or guardian. And just as the other slide had before, on the second part of the slide, you can see many reasons why a student could be unaccompanied. So whether they are running away from home due to abuse or neglect, perhaps they were forced to be out of their home for a variety of reasons, whether it's their identity or perhaps they were pregnant or parenting, maybe a loss of caregiver. So there are many reasons why a student can be unaccompanied and also a homeless youth. And that is important because on the FAFSA, when we're talking about homelessness, we're really only talking about unaccompanied homeless youth. Unaccompanied homeless youth or unaccompanied youth who are at risk of homelessness and self-supporting are considered independent students. And that means that they do not need to include parental information on the FAFSA. This graphic has really nice definitions of what each of those pieces mean. So those unaccompanied piece that I talked about, the homeless piece, and then the self-supporting and at risk of homelessness. There's a little bit more gray area, but there's an example here shown that a student who is being evicted and has been unable to find that fixed, regular, and adequate nighttime housing. So you might be thinking, well, what about students who are experiencing homelessness with their families? Aren't they still homeless? Can they still fill out the FAFSA? And the answer is yes, they can still fill out the FAFSA, but they would just need to include parental information on the FAFSA as well. So just being an unaccompanied homeless youth just means you are an independent student and don't need to include parental information. Students who are experiencing homelessness with their families can also fill out the FAFSA, but they just would also need to include parental information too. Now I'm going to turn it over to Jenny to talk through what a foster youth.
Great. Thanks so much, Jillian. Yeah, we just wanted to, this is not a change, but just a reminder of who is considered a current or former foster youth on the FAFSA. And those young people under this definition would also be considered independent. And so that would be a young person who's currently in foster care, or it would be any young person or young adult who was in foster care at any time since age 13. And the status they are after that is fine. They could be in foster care at 13 and then go to reunification or guardianship or adoption. That's totally fine, but they just have to have been in foster care at some point at age 13 or older. We did want to flag that there's also a series of other students who would fit into that independent category. And, as Julian mentioned, there's going to be overlap. Sometimes you'll have a student who would be independent, is independent, and might meet one of these criteria, not another. But again, talking to them, you might figure out they are indeed independent. Maybe you thought they were homeless, but now you find out they're in foster care. But you also might find for these bullets that we have, bullet 3 and those sub bullets, a young person who is considered, and these are terms from the law, so we know they're not the most modern and appropriate terms, but an orphan, a young person with no living biological or adoptive parent, a ward of the court. And then this comes up a lot and is often sometimes a question when you think a young person's in foster care, find out they're not, but they're in guardianship. And if they are currently in a legal guardianship through the court, or were that young person would also be considered independent. So we know a lot of the cases you're dealing with are fact specific, but we just wanted to highlight that there's an array of circumstances. And like I said, some that might overlap. And these just give you a little bit of a guide of more questions to ask as you're trying to figure that out. Thanks, Jillian.
Awesome, thank you. And just a reminder, please put your questions in the Q&A so we can make sure that we can answer them, not in the chat. Now we're going to talk through FAFSA simplification update. The FAFSA Simplification Act was signed in 2020, which was part of the Consolidated Appropriations Act, which is fantastic. And there were many, many changes that were happening. And so there was different phased implementation of all these changes. For homeless and foster youth, this actually went into effect last year in the 23-24 FAFSA. And we received additional guidance from the Department of Education in November of 2022 and April 2023. So this is really great to have these, two pieces of guidance from the Department of Education to help advocate and share with financial aid administrators about these different homeless and foster youth provisions that have been in effect. But now in this 24-25 FAFSA, all of those other changes that we've been waiting to implement in the different phases, they are here. And one of those phases was that there was going to be a delay. So the FAFSA came out 3 months later than the original start date of October 1st, which means there might be a shorter period of time for students to fill out the FAFSA and really assess their financial aid and make an informed decision about where to go to college. So check with your state or with your institution. There might be a priority deadline for the FAFSA. I know some states have made some changes to push it back along with the delay. So for example, in California, their four-year institutions pushed their priority deadline from March 2nd to April 2nd. So your state might have also changed and pushed the priority deadline as well. Some other changes to note is that when the FAFSA first came out, it was a soft launch. So it was only open and available for a few hours at the time. But right now, the FAFSA is fully available, but there's still some tweaks. There were some really, really large changes that were happening with the FAFSA. And so there have been some glitches and some known issues that the FSA is currently monitoring. So we've linked to some of those issues here on the slide. We have worked with some students already that have completed the FAFSA in less than 10 minutes. So the FAFSA Simplification Act can actually simplify the FAFSA, which is what the whole purpose of it was. And so there are just so many changes that have been going on with the FAFSA. And some key changes that we want to highlight here is that number one, there are fewer questions on the FAFSA. There used to be, over 100 questions. And now how you answer the questions, you can answer less than 40 questions. There's been a transition from the expected family contribution, or EFC, to something now known as a student aid index, so SAI. More low-income students have been expanded to be Pell eligible, which is fantastic. Students who are documented, but they have parents who are undocumented and don't have a social security number, they can also fill out the FAFSA as a contributor. They can create those FSA IDs. And for more information on the page, you can click on that major changes link and it'll talk about how to create an FSA ID if this is a situation that you are in, that if you're a student who is documented but have parents who are undocumented, there's a whole process that you could do with this new FAFSA to fill out the FAFSA. But we also want to take some time to recognize, we know that there's a lot of fear around providing that information. And so we just want to name it and recognize that there are certainly, privacy concerns and fear for doing so. But more information can be found on the website with the major changes link to how to fill out the FSA ID for parents who are undocumented to be as a contributor. And then lastly, the whole reason why we are here to talk specifically about the homeless and foster youth provision. So we're going to spend a majority of today's webinar talking about these specific pieces. And I know many folks have a lot of questions about the FAFSA. This is like the biggest changes since, the start of the FAFSA. But we are really going to focus on this webinar specific changes and questions for our homeless and foster youth. So if you have other questions that are more general about the 24-25 FAFSA, we refer you to the FSA, the studentaid.gov website to check those out, or some of our other resources, partner organizations resources, whether that's NCAN or NAFSA. But first, we're going to do a poll. So we want to just kind of gather your thoughts on what your experiences has been like with filling out the FAFSA. So let me pull up this poll here. Let me launch it. And so right now, something should have popped up on your screen that asks what your experience with the FAFSA is so far. So one, have you tried to help a student? You have not tried to help a student yet with the FAFSA. Number two, you have tried to help a student fill out the FAFSA, but have not been successful due to delays or just kind of other issues going on. Three, you have helped a student start the FAFSA, but have not completed it yet. Four, you successfully helped a student complete the FAFSA. Good to see you. And then five, there's something else going on. Let us know in the chat. So I'll give you a few more seconds to fill out. Great, so I'm seeing some people answer in the chat, which is great. We'll wait a few more seconds for the poll, and I will launch those results in just a second. All right, I'm gonna end the poll and share the results out with everyone. Here we go. So many of you have not tried to help a student with any FAFSA yet. Well, hopefully with this webinar, you'll learn some new information and you can help your students fill out the FAFSA this way. And then next we have, I have helped the student successfully complete the FAFSA, 18% of y'all. Amazing. Well, let us know, for the folks that have successfully completed the FAFSA, let us know, how did it go? Feel free to put that in the chat as we continue on with the webinar today. Let me remove this. All right, so now we're gonna talk about the 24-25 FAFSA. This part is gonna be in two parts. One, I'm gonna go through the different homeless and foster youth provisions, the new changes that went into effect last year, but they're again also in effect this year. And then the second part of this presentation, we're actually going to see the screenshot, and we'll refer back to those key changes that I'm talking about right now. Number one, unaccompanied homeless youth and former foster youth are presumed to still be independent for each subsequent year that they are at the same institution. So what this means is if a student was determined as an unaccompanied homeless youth or a former foster youth last year in the 23-24 FAFSA, when they fill it out this year, they will need to answer yes to those questions if their situation has not changed, but they do not need to provide an additional determination or additional documentation. So for our homeless youth, in the past, they would need to provide a determination every single year that they were filling out the FAFSA. It was really time consuming, and it could be really, re-traumatizing having to share their story over and over again. But with this new change, it really streamlined the whole process. So once you have been identified, have been determined as an unaccompanied homeless youth or a former foster youth, if your situation has not changed, you're still at that same institution, you just need to say yes to those questions, and that is it. You do not need to provide anything else. Schools may ask, has your situation not changed? And students may just, again, have to affirm that this answer is still correct. So we're love to see this. This really, again, just streamlines that whole process. And I've been seeing in the chat and also with some of our own students within our scholarship program, for our students who are renewing, those are the students that are filling out the FAFSA in less than 10 minutes, which is really cool to see. Key change number two. So determinations must be made as quickly as possible. So no later than 60 days after enrollment. So they can be made as early as the year before the award year for which the student submits the application. So right now we wanna, if you are a McKinney-Vento liaison, if you're a social worker, case manager, if you're working with students, start identifying your seniors, your unaccompanied homeless youth, providing them with those determinations so that when they fill out the FAFSA, they already have that determination in hand and it can go directly to the financial aid office. We're also seeing a lot of schools, they start identifying their juniors, their unaccompanied homeless youth juniors. And so when they come their senior year, they already have that list, they already have those determinations ready to go. And this is also helpful for our financial aid administrators as well, and all of our other authorized entities that can provide determinations. We want to make sure that they are prioritizing and getting those terminations as quickly as possible. All right, key change number 3. So more programs and officials are authorized to verify unaccompanied homeless youth. So this is really great to have this expanded list of group of people that can provide determinations. So right now we have a school district liaison or their designee. Or their designee is new. So that means a McKinney-Vento liaison can designate someone else on the school, on the campus, in the school district to provide determination, whether that's a case manager or a social worker. Again, a McKinney-Vento liaison can designate someone else to be the person to provide determination. It does not fall solely on the McKinney-Vento liaison. So this is a new change. Number 2, a director or designee of a director of an emergency or transitional shelter. It does not need to be specifically HUD or ARP-HCY funded. A street outreach program, a homeless youth drop-in center, or any other program serving individuals experiencing homelessness. So this is great. Again, we are expanding the list of service providers, programs, shelters. It does not need to be specific to HUD or ARP-HCY funded, which is what it was in the past. It's any program that serves individuals experiencing homelessness. So this is really fantastic because, one, a lot of our students weren't really going to shelters to begin with, or if they were going to shelters that were specific to, college students or young adults. But if they were there, they weren't asking, like, by the way, how are you funded? Are you funded by HUD? That wasn't a question that they were thinking, but now they don't need to even think about those questions. They know if I was at a shelter, if I was at a program, then I can ask that director or that designee, and they can provide me a determination. And just again, as a reminder, putting questions in the Q&A, not in the chat, that'd be super helpful for my other co-presenters that are answering questions. So those are 2 key people so far. Third group, director or designee of a TRIO or Gear Up program. This is a whole new group of individuals that now can provide determination. There's a lot of overlap between students that TRIO and Gear Up serve and our homeless youth. So it's really great to see that this population can now provide determinations for our students, since there is some overlap. Last group that could provide determinations are financial aid administrators at another institution who previously made a determination in the same or prior award year. So this really pertains to students who have transferred. So for example, say a student was never identified as homeless in high school. They are at a community college, their living situation changes, they are now an unaccompanied homeless youth. They reach out to their community college financial aid office, request a determination for an unaccompanied homeless youth. That financial aid administrator says, yep, you meet this definition. You are determined as an unaccompanied homeless youth, as an independent student, you are good to go. Now, say that student transfers to a 4-year institution. That student does not need to go through that process all over again. The determination made from the community college financial aid administrator will carry over to that 4-year institution, to that student with that FAFSA filling it out. So really great, again, to just name specifically, financial aid administrators at a previous institution or that were in a prior award year or in the same award year. And we'll talk a little bit more about financial aid administrators and their role for students who don't have determinations. But jumping ahead, I'm getting excited over here. All right. Oh, and key change number 4. So financial aid administrators must accept documentation from authorized entities for homeless youth. So all those people that I just talked about in key change number 3, if they provide a determination, financial aid administrators must accept documentation from all of those people, unless there's some sort of conflicting information. Documentation can look like a lot of things. I'm saying, in the chat, it could be a letter. That tends to be the most popular. And we have an example of what that looks like here at Schoolhouse Connection. It could be a documented phone call. It could be a written statement. So it doesn't need to be specifically, you know, that letter. So I personally enjoy having a paper trail. So I'm more partial to having a determination letter, but it can, again, be a documented phone call or a written statement. And we have examples of what written statements can look like as well. So if the student has received a documented determination from, you know, all of those people or any one of those people, and key change number 3, the institution must not request additional documentation, proof, or statements unless there's some sort of conflicting information. So in the past, we have worked with some students where they have their McKinney-Vento determination letter from high school, they provide it to the school, and sometimes the financial aid administrators offices will ask for more things. They will ask for things to, you know, additional paperwork to be filled out. They might ask for something to be notarized. That happened to one of our scholars during the pandemic. And we were like, it's the pandemic. We can't get things notarized. And also you don't need to get things notarized. You just need this determination letter. So really just want to make sure for our folks, anyone from higher education institutions or financial aid offices, you do not need to request any additional documentation if the student already has a determination from any of those authorized people that I mentioned in key change number 3. All right, this is the key change that I was jumping the gun on a little bit. Financial aid administrators must make unaccompanied homeless youth determinations for youth who cannot get determinations from authorized entities. So if a student cannot get a determination from any of those people on key change number 3, they weren't identified in high school, maybe there are no TRIO Gear Up programs in their area, there are no shelters or programs in their area as well, they go to college and they are an unaccompanied homeless youth and they're filling out the FAFSA. It falls on the financial aid administrator to then make a determination. And these determinations must be based, again, can be a written statement or a documented interview with a student. And the whole purpose of this conversation or the written statement is to confirm that a student is an unaccompanied homeless youth or unaccompanied at risk of homelessness and self-supporting. So think back to those review of that homeless definition that I talked about in the beginning of the presentation. And so these determinations must be made based on the legal definitions of homelessness under, you know, McKinney-Vento, and should focus on if the student meets the definition of an unaccompanied homeless youth and not why. So we will talk a little bit more about this a little bit later when you see the screenshots of the questions. But we've done a lot of advocacy and a lot of work with our financial aid administrators, and we've created specific tools. So I'm going to show some of them here on the screen, and you'll get a copy of this PowerPoint after the meeting as well as the recording. So you'll get all of these resources too. But we have created a determination template for financial aid administrators that you can walk through and ask an unaccompanied homeless youth these questions. And that is your documented interview. That's all you need to do. Just follow along with those questions and that's it. And we recognize, you know, some people might need to like see it. So we created a video. We made a role-playing video to show what that can look like. So that's on YouTube. And then if you're like if you're a financial aid administrator and you're like, I don't still feel comfortable, you know, conducting these unaccompanied homeless youth determinations. Can I just have the student fill out something for me? Great. We made a resource for you. We have a financial aid written statement template that a financial aid administrator can give to a student. The student fills it out, and that is all you need in terms of a determination, in terms of documentation. So really great tools for financial aid administrators. We've been loving partnering with them with NASFA and other institutions. So we really want to help educate and help financial aid administrators, you know, be advocates for our students and remove barriers for students to receive their financial aid. All right, I'm going to turn it over back to Jenny to talk about a key change for our foster youth.
Hi, everyone. Thanks again, Jillian. Yeah, just wanted to talk to everyone about the documentation that's available that is expanded for young people who are or were in foster care. And I think there was a question in the chat about a participant talking about it being challenging, and to prove that a youth is or was in foster care. And we hope that this expansion makes it easier. So in terms of what can serve as documentation, it can be verification that the student's eligible for CHAFE services, transition services. Some people might call those independent living services. You can have a court document, but again, you don't need to. The court document tends to be something that is not terribly accessible to young people or those working with them, so that is not necessary. But if that is something they have, you can definitely go ahead and use that. Next slide. Thanks, Jillian. And then the first bullet, I think, is the one that's most accessible to everyone: a documented phone call or written statement from an attorney, a guardian ad litem, a court-appointed special advocate, CASA, or service provider that really does confirm that the student was in foster care at the applicable age, 13 or older. And again, that really can be from an array of people. It can be the service provider. A lot of young people in foster care do have attorneys or guardian ad litems, and they something on their letterhead is definitely appropriate. So this should make it a lot easier. And then a documented phone call or written statement from a financial administrator or verifiable electronic data match that confirms the student is eligible. Some states have those kind of cross data matches, so some schools might have already the documentation that the youth is or was in foster care. So again, this should make it a lot easier for you all on the phone, whether you are working with youth as a caseworker, as an advocate, as a service provider. And so again, there was a question in the chat. We hope this will make it easier for you. And if you do have questions, definitely feel free to put them in the Q&A, because again, I think this reduces a lot of barriers to that documentation question. Thanks, Jillian.
All right, key change number 7. So we recognize that students may be independent for reasons that are not homeless or foster youth, but they might be something called a provisional independent student. And so these students will submit the FAFSA indicating that they have some unusual circumstance. And there are some examples here on the screen, and this might make a little bit more sense when we look at the screenshots. But these students will submit their FAFSA indicating, these unusual circumstances. They will meet with a financial aid administrator, and if the financial aid administrator thinks, their situation, they cannot provide parental information, they will conduct a dependency override and make the student be an independent student. But we really want to just hone in on this importance and really clarify that homeless and foster youth determinations are completely different and distinct from dependency overrides and provisional independence. And this comes to play in the screenshots that I will talk about in just a little bit. So again, homeless and foster youth provisions, they have very clear processes that are outlined in the law, what I just pulled us through with all the different key changes. They're very specific with financial aid. It's, do you meet this definition? Yes or no. There are processes set in place to, determine if a student meets those definitions. Dependency overrides and provisional independent student status, they're granted on a case-by-case basis. And financial aid administrators use their professional judgment in order to determine if a student is an independent student. But we want to make sure that these scenarios we know that they're completely separate. But sometimes students who are in unusual circumstances, those can be a factor or maybe a reason why they are an unaccompanied homeless youth, or maybe they have experience in foster care system. And so it's important to kind of screen these students a little bit more, because if they are a homeless or foster youth, they should go that route rather than going the route of a provisional independent student and going through a dependency override. And this will make more sense when you see the screenshots. But just to really, really clarify here, provisional independence does not mean unaccompanied homeless youth determination. If there's one thing we really want you to take away from this PowerPoint, this webinar today, it is this slide. And this is important when we get to the screenshot. But now I'm going to turn it over to Debbie to give us one more key change.
All right, thank you very much. So the one last change I wanted to mention is a change in how certain types of income are treated on the FAFSA. So there's two types of income that used to be considered what's called other financial assistance, meaning that it reduced a student's eligibility for financial aid because it sort of counted towards the maximum amount of financial aid a student could receive, which is capped at the student's cost of attendance. So foster care payments, including Chafee education and training vouchers and room and board grants provided by an independent living program, are no longer included in other financial assistance. Foster care payments never really have been, but Chafee ETV grants historically have been counted. And so this is a change that they're not going to be considered other financial assistance and won't reduce a student's award amount. And the second category is emergency financial assistance provided to the student for unexpected expenses that are a component of the student's cost of attendance. So, for example, if a student has already received their financial aid and they subsequently get a grant from the Campus Basic Needs Center to cover housing, in the past that had to be sent through the financial aid office and could potentially reduce the financial aid award depending on whether the student had remaining unmet need. That's no longer the case. It won't reduce a student's award to receive this kind of emergency financial assistance moving forward.
Awesome. Thank you, Debbie. Super important. Glad to see those changes for emergency aid. All right. Now we're going to see, what does this actually look like in practice? So we're going to show you some screenshots from the 24-25 FAFSA. And when you get, the copy of this PowerPoint, Barbara has been putting it in the chat. So thank you, Barbara, for keep putting that in there. And again, you'll get a copy of this in a few days. We refer back to the key changes. So if you're looking at the screenshot and being like, what is she talking about? Why do we have this here? It'll say, refer back to key change X, Y, and Z. So you'll see that here. So with Jenny, I'll turn it over to you to talk through just the FOSS youth question here and how that refers back to the key changes you talked about on key change number 6.
Thanks so much, Jillian. And I'm sorry that my screen, okay, apologize. Sorry, my screen was a little fuzzy. Sorry to the audience. Yes, in terms of the questions for of the key change for number 6, this would just correspond to when we talked about the definition for independent students, but that you would have the question about whether a young person was in foster care at age 13 or older, but that it would also prompt you to consider those other categories for independence, whether they were a ward of the court, again, at any time since they turned 13, were they in foster care. So I think, and Jillian, you can weigh in. I mean, I think this allows you to remember some of the big items in terms of homeless and unaccompanied foster, but does make sure that if you do have students that might fit into those other categories, that you consider if a student you're working with would be independent under those bases as well.
Great. And what's really cool about with the new 24-25 FAFSA is these are, check all that applies. So in the past, it was very much like you check this, and then sometimes with skip logic, you would never get to the homeless question. So for students who have children, have dependents, they would answer, yes to this. And then because they were deemed independent through answering yes to that question, they would never get to the homeless question. But now we don't have that anymore. They can check all that apply here and then still get to that homeless question, which looks like this. This is the homeless youth question that pops up after you see this slide. It'll then bring you to this side. It'll say, at any time on or after July 1st, 2023, was the student unaccompanied and either homeless or self-supporting and at risk of being homeless? So if you answer, yes, I do meet this definition, then this screen pops up. Did any of the following determine that the student was homeless or at risk of being homeless? So we have all the group of authorized entities that I talked about literally, but verbatim right here, all those people. Many of you, if you are in high school or working with students in high school, you'd be checking, the second box, the school's high school or school district homeless liaison. And you would just click those boxes. I'll talk about what happens when you click none of these apply, but say you can answer, click, any of these four. You click that, click continue, and this is what you get. You get, based on your students, you're an independent student. This means you don't need to answer questions about your parents to complete your FAFSA form. And then you continue on. So this is really easy for our students that have a determination from any of those authorized entities. They click those two boxes, continue on with the FAFSA, and then would just need to provide the financial aid office with that determination, whatever that looks like, whether it's a form, a written statement, documented phone call, what have you. Now let's talk about what happens if you have none of these apply. So if you remember key change number 5, if a student cannot get a determination from any of those authorized entities, financial aid administrators must. They are required to provide determinations for unaccompanied homeless youth. And this is what pops up. So this says provisional independent student status. Based on your answers, you're a provisionally independent student status. This means you don't need to answer questions about your parents to submit your application. To complete your application, you'll need to contact your school's financial aid office and provide documentation to verify your circumstances. We won't be able to calculate your SIE, your student aid index, until you confirm your circumstances with your financial aid office. Until then, we will only provide you an estimate of your federal student aid eligibility as an independent student. All right, team. If you remember that one slide, the big slide with the block letters that said provisional independent student does not equal unaccompanied homeless youth determinations. That is why we really wanted you to remember that, is because this pops up after you say none of those apply. And this is not correct. And we have informed the Department of Education. We put public comments. We are working and have had conversations with the Department of Education. They are aware that there is this issue. And the Department of Education has assured us that this is what students are seeing on the front end, but on the back end, financial aid administrators know that everything is routed and coded as an unaccompanied homeless youth determination. So they have told us that what financial aid administrators see on the other side is different, but we know that students and families are going to be confused, and they're going to see provisional independent student and they might think, I'm a provisional independent student, and not go the route of those unaccompanied homeless youth determinations that I talked about. So we get it's a little confusing, and we want to do a little bit more advocacy with the Department of Education. But again, just the one thing I really want to make sure we all are aware, provisional independent students does not mean unaccompanied homeless youth determinations. We just want to make that really clear, because what you're seeing on the FAFSA is not correct, is not accurate. We really want to work to change those issues. But again, FSA has a lot of glitches and known issues that they're working on. We're just adding this one to the list. So just wanted to clarify that with all of you. And we'll talk through, what to do next. So if you are an unaccompanied homeless youth and you don't have a determination, and you got, that slide that I just showed you, this is what happens. This is what you should do if you're a student. Number 1, reach out to the financial aid administrator and request an unaccompanied homeless youth determination. All these things that are like highlighted, hyperlinked, it's because we have a resource. So we actually have an email template that students can copy and paste and send to their financial aid administrator and say, I'm requesting an unaccompanied homeless youth determination. I don't have a determination from any of those authorized entities. We cite the guidance, we cite the law. It's really, really easy for students. Just copy and paste that. And then as you're waiting for a determination from your financial aid administrator, you can prepare for the interview. We have some tips there. Or again, maybe the financial aid administrator doesn't want to do a documented interview in person or via Zoom or anything, and would much rather prefer you create a written statement. Similarly, we have a written statement made specifically for students that the students can just fill out and provide back to the financial aid office. So these are all the things a student can do if they do not have a determination, but they are in fact a homeless youth and need to get a determination from their financial aid. On the flip side, this is what financial aid can be doing. So number one, include information about the full unaccompanied homeless youth determination process on your website if it's not there already. And per the guidance from the Department of Education, we want to make sure that institutions should be able to show that their policies and their procedures for reviewing and making homeless youth determinations are compliant with statutory requirements. So all the things that I've just been saying, this is pulled from the law, this is pulled from the guidance, this is what your policies and procedures should be. Other things financial aid administrators can be doing, we want to make sure that they're providing those determinations as quickly as practicable. So really prioritizing our homeless youth. We are making sure financial aid administrators are not requiring extra documentation. And again, want to make sure that they are not conflating dependency overrides or provisional independent students with unaccompanied homeless youth determinations. Different and distinct procedures. So now you're like, okay, well then if they said, that was provisional independent, like what is provisional independent? This is a provisional independence question. So if you answered after the homeless question, this question will then pop up. If you answered no to the homeless question, you will get this question. Do unusual circumstances prevent the student from contacting their parents, or would contacting their parents pose a risk to the student? And they list, why a student can be experiencing an unusual circumstance. You can see, left home to an abusive or threatening environment, or abandoned or estranged by their parents, are otherwise unable to contact or locate their parents. So a lot of different reasons why these unusual circumstances, but these are just, this is not an extensive list, just some examples I have here. But again, it prompts you right here, and I apologize for the little mouse here on the screen in the screenshot. If the student's circumstances resulted in not having a safe and stable place to live, they may be considered a homeless youth and should review the answer to the previous question about being unaccompanied and homeless. So right there, when I mentioned screen your students who have unusual circumstances, because this could be an underlying factor for why a student could be unaccompanied or former foster, the FAFSA recognizes that too. And they are encouraging you, if you think you meet that definition, they bump you back to that previous question. So if you aren't, though, say you still have unusual circumstances, but you are not homeless, you are not a former foster youth, you would say yes. And then the same screenshot that we saw for the unaccompanied homeless youth that said yes to homeless, but none of those apply. So this is why we're worried and really want to make sure everyone understands that provisional independent student status and unaccompanied homeless youth determinations are not the same, because the same screenshot pops up for both. But again, we'll reiterate, the Department of Education has assured us that on the back end, it is very different, and that financial aid administrators should know how to respond and process the student situation based on where they were at and where they were able to answer the questions. So provisional independent student status is not the same as unaccompanied homeless youth determinations. But for the students who are provisionally independent, these are the steps that a student can take. So 1, confirm that you do not meet that definition of an unaccompanied homeless youth or a former foster youth. Then number 2, reach out to the financial aid administrator and say that you are a provisional independent student and ask about the institution's processes and next steps. Typically, with the dependency override, students are asked by the financial aid office to provide letters of support. Maybe it's from, family members, from friends, professors, clergy, doctors, attorneys, other folks, and these letters of support can help the financial aid administrator make that case-by-case decision using their professional judgment. So these are specific for our students who are provisionally independent, not our unaccompanied homeless youth. That was the process I talked about before. On the back end, as a financial aid administrator, similarly, you want to post information about dependency overrides, about provisional independence on your financial aid website. Number 2, you want to confirm that the student does not meet the definition of an unaccompanied homeless youth. And if the student does meet the definition of an unaccompanied homeless youth, you conduct the unaccompanied homeless youth determination and go through all the processes that I talked about before. Again, if the student is a provisional independent student, you'll send the student the information about next steps that the student needs to provide. Maybe it's, those letters of support, conducting an interview, what have you. But the financial aid administrator will exercise their professional judgment and make a determination of the student's dependency status. And unfortunately, we get this question a lot. There isn't a like a template or anything for financial aid administrators to do dependency overrides. That really is on institution policy base by base, case by case. And so there isn't anything that the Department of Education or like a federal government form that financial aid administrators can use for dependency overrides, like how we have our homeless youth determination template. Okay, that was a lot of information. We have a few more slides, but I'm just gonna take a quick pause for some questions here. And in the chat, I'm curious if people can put in the chat, what additional guidance or tools or anything you think would be helpful to implement these new policies. All the things that I've talked about right now, the tools that we created specific to financial aid, all the templates, the determination forms, things that are focused towards youth, we have created all of those pieces because the folks were saying that they wish they had those things. So let us know in the chat if there are specific tools, templates, in the chat, let us know if there are specific tools and resources, but the questions that you have, keep those questions in the Q&A. So I'm gonna take a few minutes to read some questions out loud, and I'll call on my co-presenters to help answer them. So for this first question, student family is homeless. Can we write the student a FAFSA letter and parents must submit income documentation, or do we not provide it? So if a student is experiencing homelessness with their family, they do not need a determination letter. They would fill out the FAFSA as instructed. They will include parental information. That means, income from the parents, and that is how they would fill out the FAFSA. They do not need that determination letter. All right. What does an unaccompanied homeless youth who transfers to a new institution need to do? So if the unaccompanied homeless youth is transferring to a new institution and they were not identified, in high school by their school district liaison or their financial aid administrator at a previous institution, they would go through the process that I had talked about before. And so that would be reaching out to the financial aid administrator and requesting a determination. So they can use that email template that we linked to in the chat or on the PowerPoint, and ask that financial aid administrator to make the determination for them. All right, Barbara, I am going to turn this one to you. I'm gonna get a drink of water, so I'm turning it to you. If they become an independent after age 18, so still in high school, are they still considered an unaccompanied homeless youth?
Yes, the answer is yes, and this is related to a similar question about the age of youth. So for FAFSA purposes, youth are 24 and are under 24. So yes, if you experience homelessness after high school, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, you would qualify as unaccompanied homeless youth if you meet the definition of homeless and unaccompanied.
Awesome, thank you. Let me see if we got some, we'll do another question here and then we got more resources to share. So why are institutions requiring dependency overrides for unaccompanied homeless youth? And so with that, I think, we just are trying to do a lot more educating to make sure, because we think some folks are getting them conflated. It's confusing. And especially right now with this new FAFSA, when people are literally seeing the same screen that's popping up for both dependency overrides and unaccompanied homeless youth, for those, none of those apply if they aren't able to provide those determinations. So we understand that it can be confusing, but institutions should not be requiring dependency overrides for unaccompanied homeless youth. They should be doing unaccompanied homeless youth determinations. So that's why we really want to stress the importance of Provisional independence does not equal unaccompanied homeless youth determinations. Barbara, you
And
want
I'll
to add
just,
something?
yeah, I just want to jump in and say, in the advocacy that will have to happen with individual financial aid administrators, that April guidance from the U.S. Department of Education is incredibly helpful. We've used it a lot at Schoolhouse Connection with students who reach out to us, because it really states things quite plainly. And given the extent of the changes in FAFSA simplification, these pieces can get lost. So that's if that happens and a youth is being asked for documentation they shouldn't be asked for, they're being told to go through a different process than what the law says, then having that April guidance from the Department of Education, it's a couple pages long, really is your best advocacy tool.
Great. And Barbara, maybe you can add that April guidance in the chat so people can see it. So that could be, yep, we're going to put that in the chat. We use this April guidance everywhere. All right, I'm going to keep the ball rolling right now, and we'll have plenty of time again for more questions. So keep putting them in the Q&A. We're just going to talk through, some general best practices. And this, I'm really encouraging folks in the chat, if you're doing something really cool to help support students experiencing homelessness, fill out the FAFSA or students in foster care, let us know. Put those best practices in the chat. Number one, explaining these new changes about the 24-25 FAFSA to students. So whether that's social media campaigns, tables, sending emails, flyers, really, letting students know that there are so many things that are going on. We created a template that, again, we love templates as well as Connection. We were trying to make things as easy for you as possible. If anything, that you just copy and paste. And it has all the resources and information that you need to send to students to say, these are the things that you need in order to prepare for the FAFSA. Number two, identify your unaccompanied homeless youth and provide determination to them as soon as possible. And then also having them fill out the FAFSA as soon as possible. So now that the FAFSA is out and available, we really want to encourage our students to fill out the FAFSA so they can get the most amount of aid awarded and hopefully get that in before those priority deadlines for either your state or your institution. And number four, encourage students to reach out to the financial aid office, even if they are accompanied, to see if there's extra aid or resources that are available. It's always good to try to encourage students to build that rapport with the financial aid office, just so that they're comfortable to go there, talk through different processes and procedures. But specifically our students, the question that I answered before, for students who are experiencing homelessness with their families, since they aren't answering yes to the homeless question, they might not be flagged, as homeless on the FAFSA because they didn't answer yes to that. And some institutions might have specific programs that are for all students experiencing homelessness. And so by reaching out to the financial aid office and saying, hey, by the way, I'm experiencing homelessness with my family. I'm just curious, is there any extra support that the institution can offer? Are there any programs? Are there any other resources? That's a great way to, number one, just building that connection with the financial aid office. But sometimes there are actually, those resources, support, aid, perhaps even additional scholarship money. So all students experiencing homelessness, whether you're with their families or not with your families, start building that relationship with financial aid is important. I don't even know what number we're on, but we're seeing other really cool partnerships between high schools and colleges, especially, like right now. This is completely new. The 24-25 FAFSA is so new. So how can we utilize partnerships with our financial aid administrators at local colleges? And can we host, FAFSA nights between schools, like feeder schools, and, the students who are in college to do the FAFSA nights? Something we also want to tell y'all that remind students that they need to fill out the FAFSA every single year that they are going to college. We're sometimes surprised that some of the students that we're working with, they think it's like applying to college. Once you apply once, that kind of like follows you throughout the remainder of their time there. So making sure that they are aware that, come this time next year, you want to fill out your FAFSA again as soon as possible. Hopefully the 25-26 FAFSA, it'll be out and ready on October 1st with no issues at all. It'll be smooth sailing. So just, again, making sure that students know that they need to fill out the FAFSA, especially if you're working with your seniors and maybe you are this person's, the student's like person, you know, you've helped them with college and with applications and the FAFSA. They might not have a you yet at the college. And so just starting to have them, you know, put a reminder on their phone, October 1st, fill out the FAFSA, just preparing them for success once they're at college. And then lastly, partner with partner with homeless higher education liaisons or other support programs on campus and share resources about resources to students. So my laptop was about to die. Some colleges, some states might have a homeless higher education liaison. These are individuals that kind of mimic the McKinney-Vento liaison on the K-12 side, but they're on the post-secondary side. And they can really help students identify, you know, various resources, connect them to resources both on campus or off campus, and just kind of be that person, hopefully, for our students. So really great way. And another way that we're seeing with the FAFSA is that the homeless higher education liaisons, they can actually provide determinations for unaccompanied homeless youth. They fall under that for, you know, programs that serve individuals experiencing homelessness. That is a homeless higher education liaison. Their role is to serve individuals experiencing homelessness. They can now provide those determinations, and we've been doing a lot of work within Schoolhouse Connection to empower and help those homeless liaisons with those determinations and partnering with the financial aid office. So I'm going to now shift it over to Barbara to talk about ARP-HCY and how that can be used for FAFSA.
Great. So thank you very much, Jillian. We got a lot of questions we haven't gotten to. So I wrote in the chat, and we have 3 people who are responding to as many questions as they can. And please know that we don't get to them, we'll send out and afterwards to answer all these great questions. But just real quickly, for those of you in the K-12 system, and for those of you who are partnering with those in the K-12 system, the American Rescue Plan Act provided dedicated funding for children and youth experiencing homelessness. Those funds can be obligated up until September of 2024, so they are very relevant right now. And we have new guidance that states that they can be used specifically to assist young people with higher education transition activities, including the FAFSA. So for example, there was new guidance issued in September. You can click on that and get a link to it. And on the next slide, we've sort of summarized what some of those key allowable uses are. So school districts can use their ARP-HCY funds to assist youth and their parents with FAFSA completion and many other college readiness activities, can add staff hours for those assistants, can pay for college application expense fees, registration fees, all of the things that are listed on the slide here. Again, paying stipends to coaches. So there's a lot that we think has been kind of overlooked within the American Rescue Plan. Homeless children and youth that's specifically related to helping young people who are homeless transition to higher ed, including paying for the FAFSA. So just know that that is a resource there. And again, for those of you who are working in the K-12 system and haven't thought about that or want more information about that, please let us know, because we want to make sure that these resources are used and used well in the time that's remaining.
All right, thank you. So I'm going to run through resources really quick, but continue the Q&A in the chat, or not in the chat, in the Q&A portion. All the resources that we talked about, we summarize them here on this page, but everything will really live on our FAFSA page. It's broken down really nicely into, if you are a youth, go to these resources. If you're in K-12, go here. If you're higher ed, go here. So all that, go there. We actually have our scholarship program available. So these are actually for juniors right now. So starting to work, if you are working with homeless youth that are in their junior year, or they will be beginning post-secondary studies in 2025. More information can be found at our scholarship page. It's a really great opportunity. You can learn more about it on the page here. Ways to connect with us on social media. And then lastly, here's our contact information. And again, before we go to Q&A, I just want to thank Jenny, Debbie, and Jasmine in the background, and Barbara for frantically answering all your questions. I'm sure I'm going to be calling on you soon for our Q&A for the last 10 minutes here. So with that, I'm going to look back at our questions. All right. So if you are making a homeless youth or unaccompanied and at risk of homeless determination, can you request documentation such as an eviction notice? Barbara, your thoughts?
So again, with these, and I don't know if the questioner was coming from the K-12 system or from the higher education system, but when you're making determinations of homelessness, you're looking at the living situation. Like, is it lacking fixed, regular, and adequate housing? So asking for documentation is not going to help you do that. It would actually just create an additional barrier. What you can do instead is use some of our resources that specifically are helping with the documented interview to ask questions about that. So anything like an eviction notice, like proof that somebody kicked you out, is going to add another layer and really actually won't help you determine the question of, are they experiencing homelessness, not why. In fact, the law actually says that determinations have to be made on their living situation and not on why they're in that living situation. So an eviction notice would just get to the why and isn't necessary.
Awesome. Thank you so much for clarifying that. And just want to say again, we will be sending you a copy of this recording, PowerPoint. That can happen in the next few days, but for our Q&A that we are compiling, that will probably take a few more days, maybe a few more weeks. So stay tuned, but we'll make sure that we send that out to everyone who has registered for the webinar. That will be coming shortly. All right. For Jenny or Debbie or Jasmine, if we have a foster youth in a transitional housing program, will they check the foster youth question, but not the homeless question? Can you help clarify what that would be?
I can jump in. This is Debbie. I would say that if they meet the definition for a foster youth, I would have them check the box for foster youth. That's an easier definition to verify, and you don't need to worry about status changes or anything like that. And so that would be my recommendation just for ease. I don't think that that student would meet the definition for a homeless student. So I would probably just go with the foster youth.
Awesome.
I think
Thank
I answered
you.
this in the chat, so I just wanted to add, I don't know the details about what they mean when they say transitional housing. So they might mean child welfare transitional housing, or they could mean something that is more related to young folks who are experiencing homelessness. Either way, I think what Debbie said about picking the foster youth status on the FAFSA does make sense, because again, that process is easier, but it's still a good idea to go ahead and find out, right, about the foster youth resources or the resources for youth experiencing homelessness that are available in your state or locality, because that youth could qualify, right, for all of those resources. That typically does not hinge on whether or not they pick foster youth or homeless youth on the FAFSA. The FAFSA thing is just how to make sure that you get your documentation together to be an independent student. But that young person, depending on the specific circumstances, again, you could certainly have a young person who is a former foster youth who is also experiencing homelessness, who would be eligible for various types of state, federal, or local resources to help them based off of all of those things. So still look at all of the potential resources, but for the purposes of this particular form, foster youth, if you can get documentation, typically going to be easier.
Thank you, Jasmine, for that. So we have here, when we were talking about if an unaccompanied homeless youth or former foster youth are given the correct form, so whether that be that determination letter to be approved that they are identified as those youth, it transfers to the 4-year. Does that include if they transfer out of state? So yep, all colleges, it doesn't need to be, that student that was in school at that state, only it works, for colleges in that state. All institutions must accept determinations from any of those authorized entities. So the school district or their designee, TRIO or Gear Up, any program, shelter, service, homeless youth drop-in center, any program serving individuals experiencing homelessness, and then also those financial aid administrators at a previous institution. It does not need to be state specific, just any of those authorized entities. All right.
And Jillian, related to that, just this might have been in the chat, for programs that are on-campus basic needs programs or EOP programs, would they be programs that could verify homelessness?
Yep. And so with just like those homeless higher education liaisons, they can provide those determinations, which is really fantastic to see. We've also been seeing some partnerships, with the financial aid offices. So sometimes financial aid offices will really, refer students to go to those offices because they tend to work with those students a little bit more to make those determinations. So thanks for bringing that up, Jenny. All right. Barbara, I'm going to turn this one to you. Would a student be considered an unaccompanied homeless youth if they are living with or under the custody of a grandparent, since it specifically states, parent or step-parent?
So if someone is in the custody of a grandparent, then they would not be unaccompanied. Unaccompanied is not in the physical custody of a parent, or they could be homeless, but they wouldn't be unaccompanied if the grandparent is homeless and they're homeless with their grandparent. For many young people who may be staying with grandparents temporarily, it's not fixed, it's not regular, they don't have legal custody. So it's really case by case. You want to look at the individual situation. For example, there are cases where young people may be raised by their grandparents, they live with their grandparents, it's fixed, it's regular, but their grandparent doesn't have legal custody. They wouldn't be experiencing homelessness even though they're unaccompanied. So for the FAFSA purposes and what we're talking about here, we're looking at experiencing homelessness and unaccompanied. So again, in a grandparent situation, they could be staying with the grandparent. It's not fixed, regular, or adequate. They don't know how long they can stay there, and the grandparent doesn't either or doesn't have custody. In those situations look more like homelessness. So again, that really gets into the case-by-case determinations.
Thank you. And we get so many scenarios a week. We're here, presenting this information, but we know that so many situations, there's so much small nuance, and we're always happy to kind of be, like thought partners, and we respond to emails if you have specific questions about situations that you just want a little bit more clarification, or you're not really sure if things might meet a definition. We're happy to kind of help you through those pieces. All right, I'm looking through the Q&A right now, and also want to see if Jenny, Debbie, or Jasmine, if there's anything that you want to unmute and say. We have about a few minutes left, so just want to turn it to you if there's anything glaring that I'm missing. Everyone knows my key takeaway is that provisional independence does not mean unaccompanied homeless youth determinations, but I'm going to turn it to you if there's keywords of wisdom you want to share with the group.
This is Debbie from JBay. I will just make a quick pitch that for any of you who are from California, or even for some of you who aren't, we have a bunch of resources on our website, and I'll put it in the chat, a financial aid guide for foster and homeless students, as well as what we call our visual guides, which actually provides you with screen by screen shots of every single screen that a student will see in the FAFSA or the California DREAM Act application, who is a homeless student or foster youth. So I will find those right now and put it in the chat in case anybody wants to take a look at those materials.
And Jill, this is Jenny. One question, and I'm sorry if you got to this while I was typing and I didn't hear it. The question about if you were experiencing homelessness when you completed the FAFSA, but then secured housing later in the year, if you need to report that. Did you answer that question already?
No, we did not answer that question, but so yeah, if they again meet that definition, if they were had experienced homelessness on or after July 1st during that time, at any point in that period, then they would answer yes to the homeless question. Come the the following year, if they are filling out the FAFSA for 25, 26, and they are not, if they are in stable housing, then they would need to inform the institution that their situation has changed. But mid-year, if they on or after July 1st of 2023, if they have become stably housed, they are fine.
Thanks.
I'll just jump in and say there are a couple related questions about subsequent year determinations. So these are young people who were identified as homeless, by the liaison in the K-12 system, and now it's 2 years later, and do liaisons need to write letters of determination. Really, once the student has graduated high school, it's the financial aid administrator's responsibility to go through these processes. Liaisons can still be really helpful, particularly if they get sort of interference or questions from the financial aid administrator. But for example, a letter that's 2 years old if the student is no longer experiencing homelessness and the liaison's out of touch with them, then that really wouldn't be how the student would get the unaccompanied youth determination. It would be from the financial aid administrator. And then I see questions about appeals processes. There is an ombudsman. We're working to have a more streamlined federal dispute process similar to McKinney-Vento, but it's not there yet. So again, the April guidance, and definitely reach out to us if you have questions or interference or need someone to run interference or just need some advocacy tips. We're happy to help.
See, there were at time, so I just was going to do a really quick plug. That's something that we can send out, is a little bit of information about the juvenile justice system, because there is a lot of overlap between the foster care system as well as the child welfare system and experiences of youth experiencing homelessness and juvenile justice experience. The short version is that you can still get financial aid if you'd had contact with the juvenile justice system. I'm not going to go into it super deep, but just know if you are in an agency or you are at a college or you work with young people and you're seeing that young people have juvenile justice experience, that doesn't cancel out that they were in foster care. It doesn't cancel out that they're experiencing homelessness. We can send a little one-pager about that as follow-up if people have questions.
All right. Big shout out. Thank you again to my co-presenters for answering questions. And if you have other specific questions and you want to reach out to them directly, information is here on the slide. We will send you a recording. We will send you the PowerPoint. We will send you the Q&A once we have it ready. Thank you all so much for joining us today. Stay warm and we will see you soon.